A poem written by Alaric Alexander Watts, a Victorian poet born in 1797. A cloud is on my heart and brow, the tears are in my eyes, and wishes fond are idle now, and stifled into sighs. I contemplate thine earthly doom, thou bud of beauty snatched too soon. So soon, 'neath milder skies, I turn thy painful struggle past, from what thou art to what thou wast. Your sparkling glance and hasty run, your gladness when the task was done, your gay, good-humored, childish ease, and all your thousand ways to please. Yet there are thoughts that bring relief, and sweeten even this cup of grief. You've escaped a thorny scene, a wilderness of woe, where many a blast of anguish keen has taught my tears to flow. You are safe now from the throes of pain, before sin breathed a stain upon thine opening rose. And who can calmly think of this, and not envy you thy doom of bliss? I gathered from our home's beloved bowers, to deck your coffin as you sleep, the brightest hued, most fragrant flowers that summer's dews may steep. The rosebud was there, the violet blue and jasmine fair, that drooping willow seemed to weep, and now sleep, my sweet, to the passing sweet. I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is Hard Times and True Crimes. So what are you drinking today, Melody?
I have an Americano with oat milk and sugar-free white chocolate syrup, which is...
Oh, that sounds really good.
It is very good.
I have a honey vanilla latte from Nanny Mae's here in Asheboro.
Nanny Mae's has great coffee.
They do.
Have you seen the coffin for sale on Salisbury Street?
No.
So Tim and I were going to Greensboro, and we go down Salisbury Street, and there's this antique thrift store there on the side, and there is a coffin out there for sale. Then the next day, my friend Jen, we were talking, and she said, I have to tell you what I just saw. I'm going down Salisbury Street, and I knew exactly what she was getting ready to say. And so I was telling her, I saw that. And then our friend Katie...
Yes.
Gora, she posted a picture of it on her Facebook. And so I had a really interesting conversation in the car. On the way home from church, Tim and the boys and I were just talking about, okay, like, where did this coffin come from? Like, what is the story here? And Titus was like, wait, is there a body in it? He was serious. I'm like, no, because if so, we'd have a whole different conversation. But
seriously.
But so Tim's theory is that somebody bought it, and then they decided to cremate the person, and they didn't need it anymore.
Oh.
My theory, I mean, like, can you buy those online?
That's what I was wondering. I'm like, can you buy your own casket?
I think so. I don't know. Or was it a scratch and dent? Like, it was not the right
damaged?
color, or it was damaged? I don't know. But if you need one, I can hook you up.
That is only in Asheboro, right?
Only in Asheboro.
I have not seen that, but now I feel like I'm going to have to drive by there so that I can.
And if they haven't already sold it.
I can't imagine, though, being like, that is exactly what I needed.
Yeah, let me go in and buy this coffin.
Although my mom wants to get her casket from the Amish.
Oh. Yeah. Now that's interesting.
Okay, so my last episode was about Father Hans Schmidt, if you remember that terrible, murderous Catholic priest.
How could I forget?
And the crime that I'm going to talk about today, he is an alternate suspect. You're not going to hear much about him at all. He's going to come up at the very end. So I'm just going to tell you the story as it happened at the time. Alma Catherine Kellner was born on October 4th in 1901. She was the daughter of Frederick and Florence Kellner and the granddaughter of the late John F. Kellner. a wealthy business brewery owner in Louisville, Kentucky. Alma had a sister named Jenny, who was just 1 year older than her, and Alma and Jeannie were best friends. They were schoolmates, and they were just so close in age that they did everything together. And then they also had a little brother named Frederick Jr., who, when all this came about, he was 2.5 years old. So in 1909, Alma was just a third grade student at the Academy of Our Lady of Mercy on East Broadway Street, there in Louisville. She was described as a bright, venturesome, precocious child, a model student with great promise, according to one of the sisters at her school, and she was just a favorite among the students and the sisters, easy to love, diligent, gifted in her studies. They said she could just look at something and memorize it.
Oh, that kind of reminds me of the Gretchen Harrington.
Yeah, it actually does.
Because she was described a little bit like that and the same age.
Oh, yeah.
Third grade.
Was the same age.
She was going into the third grade.
Isn't that so sad?
So very sad.
So Sister Mary Genevieve said that she was seriously devoted to God, even at her young age. When other children were playing, Alma would sometimes wander away and off to the chapel to spend time praying.
Oh, that is precious.
I love that. So those sisters loved her.
Yeah.
On Wednesday, December 8th in 1909, when Alma was 8 years old, this was a holy day on the Catholic calendar, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. Because she went to a Catholic school, it was closed that day so that families could attend Mass. Now, Alma usually went to church with her family, but she had offered that morning to stay home with her little brother, to let her mom and aunt go to the earlier service to their regular church, St. Boniface in Louisville.
The same St. Boniface church that you did mention in that last episode. Okay, I'm following. Okay.
Yep. So this was their home church. But then sometimes when they were running late or couldn't get there for some reason across town or whatever, they would just go to St. John's, which was closer to their house. And that morning, since the weather was freezing cold, Alma had offered to stay home and watch her baby brother, little Frederick, while her mom and aunt went. Then when they got home, she could just walk over to the later service at St. John's, which was so close they could literally see part of the church's roof from their front yard. Alma had made that walk several times. Her school was over there too. That morning when Miss Kellner and her sister returned, they helped Alma get dressed in a little tan and green and rose plaid dress that was trimmed with green velvet, pearl buttons, and this high-necked blouse underneath. And then she wore a black and white checkered coat, like a pea coat, this dark red hat that was shaped kind of like a mushroom that was fashionable at that time. And because it was so cold, she put on black stockings and tan gloves. She had wanted to wear her new shoes, but her aunt said, I don't want you to get them scuffed up because, she was walking.
Yeah.
And so she said, wear your older, they're still cute, but wear your older shoes. So they were these buttoned black shoes.
But she sounds like a little fashionista.
Oh, yeah.
So, I'm just picturing that. It sounds so adorable.
Her aunt, though, since she didn't get to wear her new shoes, sent her with this brand new handkerchief to put in her coat pocket with a little bow knot emblem in the corner. After she dressed, she kissed her mother, aunt, and baby brother and promised she'd come back home as soon as the service was over. At around 9:45 a.m., her mom and aunt watched as Alma skipped off down East Broadway Street. She was kind of in an even cheerier mood than normal. She kept turning around and waving, and then she'd skip and turn around and wave again. At around 11:30, Mrs. Kellner expected Alma to walk in at any moment. When she didn't, she just had this little gnawing feeling that something might not be right. But when she mentioned it to her sister reminded her, hey, we know Alma. She probably went home with a friend, or she's talking to somebody, or she's at a shop somewhere, talking to the owners, because everybody knew her. Yeah. She loved to talk. She didn't know a stranger.
Just so sociable.
She was.
Okay.
And her mom thought, she's probably right. If one of her friends offered her to come home for lunch, she would not have been able to say no. So she figured that's probably where she was. So she went ahead and they sat down and ate lunch. But then as early afternoon passed to late afternoon, Mrs. Kellner knew that something was not right. She called her husband and he told her, look, don't worry, but I'm going to come home. We're going to find her. She's at somebody's house. He and Mrs. Kellner went out searching for her in the streets. They traced where she would have walked and went to all of their friends' houses. They went to their family's houses. They stopped off at her school, everywhere, but there was no trace of her. Now, when they got a hold of the pastor at St. John's to ask if he had seen Alma at 10 a.m. Mass, he told him that he didn't know her personally and that he wouldn't have recognized her, but he said, we had Mass at 9 and not 10. So by the time Alma got there, the service would have been just about over.
Right.
Joseph Wendling was the janitor, and he said that he hadn't seen her either. At least he didn't think he had. There had been so many people coming in that morning. But he explained that he had locked up just about as soon as the church service had ended.
It does seem like she would have stood out, though.
Yeah,
this little girl dressed like she was, seems like if you had seen her, you would have remembered it.
Right. Now, several other people on the route had seen her that morning. The postman, he had seen her.
Okay.
The local druggist said that he'd seen her with a kitten just outside of his shop, and he thought it was the cutest thing because she was watching that little cat wash its face, with its hands.
Yeah.
And she was sitting there just mesmerized by this little kitten, and then she skipped off towards the church. So he said it just stuck out to him. Alma's mother broke down crying as it grew dark and dismally cold outside. It was below freezing.
Oh, goodness.
I literally cannot fathom what that would feel like. Mr. Kellner would not allow himself to give in to fear. He just continued to search and had every friend and family member out doing the same thing. He thought that maybe Alma had tried to go to another parish since she realized that she had missed Mass at St. Joseph's. So he made contact with every priest in town and had them out searching as well. But there was still no sign of Alma. Finally, Captain Portman from the Louisville Police Department was called in, and his department got in on the search. A bulletin at that point was put out all over the city. Alma Kellner was 4 feet tall with light brown hair, big blue eyes and rosy cheeks. A description of her clothing, of course, was given and her age of 8 years old. Every hospital and doctor were made aware just in case Alma had had some kind of an accident and was brought in. The police were instructed to arrest and bring in any suspicious person. They were really dedicated to find this little girl. And as Mrs. Kellner put her other 2 children to bed that night, she just burst into tears and refused to be comforted. And at the side of Alma's bed, she sobbed, "Oh, that little lonesome bed."
Oh, that poor mom.
I know.
You can't wait. I mean, how devastating that would be.
I know. I know. She just completely exhausted herself that night with crying and waiting for any word about her little girl. All through the night, every alleyway was searched, every stable, but nothing. So police thought maybe Alma was lost somewhere. Like maybe she had hurt herself and was lost. But Mr. Kellner, he said, she is very smart. She could find her way home from anywhere in Louisville. He suspected that his daughter had been kidnapped. Mr. Kellner's father had recently passed away. And as I mentioned earlier, he had been the owner of a very successful brewery. And at his death, Alma's father, he stood to inherit.
Right.
He didn't have as much as they thought, but
maybe the public didn't know that.
That's exactly right. So Mr. Kellner told reporters that he was convinced that Alma had either been kidnapped or suffered an accident that resulted in her death. He said, "I am all but crazy and I do not know what to do. I can hardly remain in the house when I know my baby is away from home and either dead or in the hands of those who are her enemies. He said, I will leave no stone unturned to find her.
Ugh, that just crushes your heart to hear it, doesn't it?
It does. And then reports started coming in to the police station. Everybody wanted to help. The town barber said that he'd seen 2 unfamiliar women that morning with a little girl that looked just like Alma. The women lifted her up into the wagon, whipped the horse, and ran away as fast as they could. And of course, that stuck out, and he was, definitely that was coming back to his mind.
Mm-hmm.
So the report was written up in the paper, but the women actually came forward with an explanation that excluded them as suspects.
And do we know what it was?
I don't.
But whatever it was, they were no longer.
They were not. It wasn't them. Then they got information that Alma was being held hostage in a house at 113 South 1st Street. So police rushed to the scene hoping to rescue her, only to discover that the tip had been a hoax.
And unfortunately, it always surprises me how many times that happens during like a missing person's. Like,
how could somebody do that to parents?
That would be, why would you do that?
Already suffering.
But we hear about it a lot.
Oh, yeah. Now, Mr. Kellner had a cousin that he was very close with. He was actually the current owner and CEO of the Fair City Brewing Company that his father used to own, Alma's grandfather.
Okay.
His name was Frank Fair. He spoke up to the media saying that it was a clear case of kidnapping. He believed that Alma was alive and probably still in Louisville. He said sooner or later the criminals would disclose themselves, and he actually advised his cousin not to offer a reward, but to wait for the criminals to reach out. A lot was made of that, but I understand what he's saying. He's like, why come out with a reward when he really believed that these criminals had got her and that they were going to ask for, like, hey, I want $10,000 to get her back.
Mm-hmm. Or if you go out offering that reward, then you're going to have people coming out of the woodwork trying to, just like we were talking about.
Right. So he actually advised his cousin just to wait. He said it was ridiculous to think that they were going to harm her before demanding a ransom.
Okay. I can follow that logic.
So Mr. Fair became kind of like the spokesman for the family. He also went out a lot with the family in his big car. They were just looking like out on the streets.
Mm-hmm.
He just headed up a lot of different searches around town with different people. So he genuinely cared about her.
Okay.
The story took a strange turn when the Kellner's former servant, Katie Martin, supposedly told Alma's mother that she'd had a meeting with 2 men, one dressed as a woman, and that they had wanted to meet with Mrs. Kellner to discuss their terms for Alma's return home. Martin and Mrs. Kellner denied the claims, but reporters insisted that Martin and Mrs. Kellner had been the one to tell them the story directly.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Ladies, I don't know about you, but over the last few years, Melody and I have noticed differences in our skin that have been pretty discouraging. The inevitable signs of aging, fine lines, some wrinkles here and there, dull, dry skin, and sunspots. Thankfully, there's a non-invasive treatment available without having to go under the knife. Tasha Briles at Lakeside Integrative in High Point, North Carolina, offers a total skin package that includes radio frequency microneedling and laser skin resurfacing that can be done right in her office in under an hour. It stimulates collagen growth and elastin that improves the surface and texture of your skin, as well as tightening it. The laser treats acne scars, minimizes large pores, and lessens, if not completely fades, sunspots. Melody and I were blessed to get this treatment in late fall. We're going back for our after photos within a couple of weeks, and we'll be sure to post them on our Facebook group. Melody was just saying how she felt like it gave her a fresh start for her skin routine. It even cleared up some precancerous skin lesions she had, and it faded my sunspots completely as well as brightened and tightened my skin. We're really thrilled with our results. Lakeside Integrative offers an array of other services for men and women, as well as fillers, laser hair removal, weight loss, hormone, and medical treatments. Don't walk, run to the phone and call Lakeside Integrative to set up your appointment at 715-0007. Tell them Darlene and Melody from Hard Times and True Crime sent you.
Okay, hang on a minute. So the servant told them somebody wanted to meet with them, and they denied it. But then did I hear that right?
Okay, so the servant told reporters that these two people had approached her and that they wanted to meet with the Kellners.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. But then when they wrote it up in the paper, she was like, I never said that. And Mrs. Kellner had told them the same thing and was kind of excited about it. But then she was like, no, that is not true.
Okay. That is a strange turn, but it makes me wonder if somebody just advised them to later, like, don't do that, and they just maybe backtracked.
Martin had claimed that the men had threatened to kill the Kellners if they got the cops involved. And so I wonder if they thought, because they printed that in the paper, if it was putting Alma in danger.
Okay.
Or putting them
Possibly.
in danger. And so they were like, no, we never said that.
Yes.
You
Maybe
know
a
what I mean?
backtracking based on that.
Or did the reporters make it up? Or did
that's not beyond the realm
the
of
Martin make it
either.
up? You know, the servant? I don't know. Like, was she trying to extort money? Yeah. There are a few different possibilities there.
Yeah.
But anyway, at first, when I was going back and reading all these articles, the cops absolutely believed that that was true.
Okay.
And that there was a cover-up, but then nothing ever came of it. And so eventually the police just went on to other leads.
At any point were the parents considered suspects?
Okay, so in the beginning, the dad, he was like, we don't need the cops here. Like, she's going to be found. I think he was in denial, but I think it looks suspicious because he held the cops off for so long.
Right.
Yeah, they didn't love the looks of that.
Okay.
But it didn't take them long to realize.
Okay.
You know. So originally, no reward had been offered, not even by the governor, because he and those closest to her really believed that Alma was going to be returned. A large group of friends and family and concerned citizens gathered together to have a meeting where they could come up with some ideas and a course of action for how they could support the Kellners. They talked about how they would hope to be supported if this were their child missing. The group vowed that they were going to search every sewer, every cellar, any place that a child could possibly be hidden. They would drag the river if they had to. They really wanted to find this little girl. One of the things that the group did was they demanded that the governor offer a reward of no less than $500 for Alma's safe return. And when he saw that the kidnappers weren't coming forward, he actually did offer the highest possible reward by Kentucky state law at that time, which was $500.
Okay. And how much time now has taken
This has been
place?
a couple weeks.
Couple weeks. Okay. So if kidnappers were going to come forward, surely they would have by then.
By that time, right. So now this amount, though, brought in people from all over.
$500?
$500. Well, that was a lot, in the early...
1909, I guess. Yeah. Okay.
But unfortunately, what happened is that the crime actually became more about the reward money than about Alma.
Well, that was my other thing when I said $500 brought them in. You would think just the fact that a little girl's missing would bring them in. So unfortunately, but money does motivate.
Strange things to people, yeah. So desperate for clues, the police even resorted to consulting a 10-year-old psychic.
10-year-old psychic?
A 10-year-old psychic named Freda Rink.
Now, that's a first for me.
She was kind of a celebrity around there at the time. But shocker, she couldn't tell them where Alma was. Lead after lead poured into the station with reports of children being seen that matched Alma's description. And no doubt these were well-meaning citizens who really believed they were seeing her. But unfortunately, days turned into weeks and Christmas passed. I know. And then New Year's, no ransom demands were made. On January 14th, Frank Fair, which was the cousin, he went back to the church to speak with Father Schumann, and he asked him about bringing some people in to just make a more thorough search of the church and the property.
That's what I've been thinking. Did they even search
They
that
did.
church?
They did.
Okay.
And we'll get into some of that, but they actually did.
Okay, good.
Winter turned into spring, and then the family, they just began coming to the realization that Alma may never come home.
Yeah, by then they have to know she's probably gone.
Right. And the cops are just baffled. Then in late May 1910, Father Schumann from St. John's, his new janitor discovered the cellar in an old school building by the church. It was literally connected like by a wall.
Okay.
And it was flooded. So he told Father Schumann, he's like, look, that water's going to weaken the walls. He advised him to call in a plumber. Richard Sweet came out to do the job. And while searching for the source of the leak, he noticed a foul odor. Sweet was glad to finally find that leak and get out of there because it stunk.
So bad. Oh.
But while he was packing up his tools, he reached for his shovel when he spotted something wrapped in carpet in the corner of a sub-cellar underneath the main cellar.
Huh.
So he stooped down and he was able to pull it up, and he pulled back a piece of the carpet, and it just took him a minute to kind of realize what he was looking at. But when it hit him, he just like jumped back in shock.
Wow.
He called the police immediately. I mean, he didn't even tell the priest. He just went and called the police. Everyone, including him, knew about Alma, so he had no doubt whose little body he had just discovered.
Yeah.
Alma had been murdered in a merciless way. All of her little ribs on one side had been broken.
Oh, goodness.
Part of her skull was shattered. Her right hand was missing. Her left arm was found beside the body. The left ankle was found on the right side of her body. Her right leg was broken and the foot was missing. Someone had cut up the body and attempted to burn it in the church furnace. They could tell because most of the little bones were charred.
Oh, goodness gracious. That's horrible.
But for some reason, the killer had given up on burning her and ended up discarding her in that sub-cellar and kind of half hidden and wrapped in that carpet. Her gloves, shoe, and a handkerchief were found covered in blood. They were sure that Alma had been sexually assaulted. I mean, most likely. They weren't sure, but they were sure.
Yeah.
Mr. Fair, the cousin, had to go and identify her body.
What a horrible task to have to do.
Her parents just couldn't bring themselves to do it.
Yeah, can you imagine? Oh.
And he actually had to identify her by some of the articles of clothing because in some hair. Yeah. Because, yeah. So nowadays that wouldn't do, but in 1910, there was no DNA testing for making a positive ID.
Right.
Frank Fair, Mr. Kellner's cousin, issued a statement saying after no one came forward with the ransom demand, he felt like Alma had probably been murdered, but he said that he tried to push that feeling down because he didn't want his family to lose hope. He offered a $1,000 reward to anyone who could provide information that would lead to the murderer's arrest. Alma was laid to rest in a tiny white casket at the family plot at the Louisville cemetery. The inscription on the top of her grave read, "Our darling." Her parents, they couldn't even bring themselves to go to the burial. She didn't really have a funeral.
Oh, those poor parents, though. I mean,
I know.
I mean, their worst nightmares have just been...
Have come true.
Yeah.
So only Frank Fair, the cousin, attended. Mr. and Mrs. Kellner, they were just trying to come to terms with what had happened. Joseph Wendling was a 26-year-old Frenchman who had been the janitor at St. John's. It came to the police's attention that he had up and left his wife on January 14th without a word, the month after Alma's disappearance. Wendling had been in charge of the furnace room that day. He also had a skeleton key to every room, so he would have had access to where the body was found. Father Schumann claimed he himself had never been to the sub-cellar and didn't even know that it existed until the janitor told him about the leak. He said he couldn't say for sure if Mr. Wendling was guilty or innocent, but he hadn't recalled him acting suspicious after the girl's disappearance. Wendling had even helped search the parish for Alma and seemed genuinely concerned. The priest also told cops when Wendling up and left, he really hadn't thought that it was related to Alma's disappearance. He figured that he just left his wife because he was 26 years old and she was 42, and they fought all the time. His wife's name was Lena Wendling. The cops, however, were convinced he was the murderer.
Well, it does look pretty bad.
It does. And since they couldn't find him, they brought Lena in to interrogate her. Now, she had been living in the rectory without her husband since he had left in January. She swore that she had no idea where he was. And when asked why she didn't report him missing, she explained, he's disappeared before several times in the past for months at a time, and he always comes back. So she said she really just didn't even think about it.
Yeah.
Mrs. Wendling told investigators her husband had been arrested before for fooling with young girls at a nearby school. When pressed, she admitted to giving him $100, but still maintained that she didn't know he was leaving. So that's weird.
Yeah. I'm already thinking that he looks really guilty now to me.
Right. She insisted that she had no knowledge whatsoever about the crime or anything about the sub-cellar, that it even existed. But she was arrested anyway for obstructing justice because when they were asking for a photograph of him, she said she didn't have a photograph, but they found one.
Why did she lie?
Right.
It does sound like she's trying to help him cover something up. So if he's guilty, what kind of person is she?
Right. Well, investigators, she totally lost all credibility with them. And when they realized that she'd probably given him money, they definitely believed she just kept changing her story. So they believed she knew where her husband was, and they were really frustrated with her. When they did a background check, though, he actually did not have a criminal record for messing with the girl. She said that he had been arrested.
Oh, she said there had been
Yeah,
an
she said he had been arrested and named the school where she said that the girls went that he had messed with, and that wasn't true.
And there was nothing to back that up?
No. It didn't happen. He had no record.
Wow.
So that was weird. The captain said, Captain Carney at the department described Mrs. Wendling as a woman of low intelligence. She kept mumbling over and over again, "He was good to me. He was kind to me." The day Alma disappeared, Father Schumann said after 9 o'clock Mass, a visiting priest came to St. John's. He and this priest went over some music together, and then they had lunch around noon that was prepared by Mrs. Wendling. She was the cook. Later that afternoon is when the Kellner family called in to ask Father Schumann if he'd seen Alma at the morning Mass. And that's when he explained, no, I don't know who she is, and that she would have been an hour late to Mass. At that point, he went over and he asked Mr. Wendling, the janitor, if he had seen Alma. He said that he hadn't, that he knew of. And then the father said that he noticed a strange odor. He asked Wendling about it. He explained that the smell had probably come from some old rags he was burning that had oil on them. Now, this really stood out to authorities because they knew that Alma's body had been burned after she was murdered.
Yeah.
Oh, but Wendling himself had actually led investigators down to the cellar to search for Alma. He held candles for him,
but maybe she wasn't there yet. Maybe he had her he was leading them to where he had not put her or something.
They said that if he did it, he was very calm. He did not seem agitated, upset, seemed totally calm. Well, on January 14th, Fair, Alma's uncle, Mr. Fair, who owned the brewery, he visited the parish to ask if they could search. Remember I told you he had done that? Well, he was like, hey, can we search the grounds more thoroughly? Mrs. Wendling told authorities that that's the day her husband had left.
Okay.
The same day, Alma's cousin had visited the parish, but she had no idea where he could have gone. She said that she had reached out to some of his family in France, thinking that he may have returned, but they hadn't seen or heard from him. Mrs. Wendling allowed the authorities to search through their belongings because she said she hadn't got rid of anything because she figured that he'd probably come back. In a dirty clothes basket, investigators found a black shirt and bathing trunks that had blood on them. A little gold ring and a pewter waist pin were also found in the trunk in Wendling's apartment. Mrs. Kellner said that the pin looked just like Alma's. She couldn't be sure about the ring, though. Police developed a theory that on December 9th, Alma had made it to the church.
Yeah.
She would have noticed she was late, but when she found the door open, probably went inside to pray anyway. When Wendling came into the sanctuary to perform his duties, he noticed Alma praying alone, and they believed this was a crime of opportunity, that at the sight of her there alone, he was compelled to lure her into a tiny prayer room that was beside the altar. This was connected to the old school, and they believed once inside, Wendling committed these unspeakable acts of violence toward her, and that she suffered horribly in that room before she was murdered.
Oh.
When Wendling was satisfied that he'd killed her, they believed he shoved her down through the hole in the floor to the furnace room.
Okay.
After Father Schumann came in that afternoon to ask about the smell of the furnace, they thought that it had scared him. And so he removed what was left of her body from the furnace, wrapped it in that carpet, and drug it down under the music room. They actually tested their theory and found the hole was big enough for the body of an 8-year-old to be drugged through. And blood stains were found along the walls to make that theory seem all the more plausible. After they searched the furnace room, they found Alma's missing tiny little burned up foot with the shoe still attached.
Oh, wow. So horrible.
In the loft of an old shed in the rectory, there was this roll of carpet that was very similar to what Alma's torso was wrapped in. Now, I did find this interesting. The old janitor, Wendling was the new janitor.
At that time,
right? And he had actually only been there since November.
Okay.
So not that long.
Right.
Before Alma was missing. He came highly recommended. But the old janitor still lived there.
Okay.
But was never questioned.
He wasn't questioned?
No.
Well, maybe he had been there for years and years and had been proven trustworthy or something.
Maybe. But it is interesting that he lived there. He would have also had knowledge.
Access and knowledge.
And access.
And you would think they would have at least questioned him to see what he had to say.
Yeah.
So that is a little bit interesting.
It is. I thought that was just something. Anyway, that carpet was recognized and remembered that it had been kept in the storeroom of the church. They felt like whoever did that just had to have like this kind of intimate knowledge of the church.
Right. Even though they have a crime of opportunity, they have to know all of that other information in order to carry it out.
Exactly. And so at that, Joseph Wendling was officially charged with Alma Kellner's murder.
But they haven't found him yet, right?
No.
Okay.
Nope. He was nowhere to be found, but for now they had Mrs. Wendling, who just laid on her cell on a cot, squalling like a baby, swearing over and over that she was innocent and didn't know anything. I mean, she was really scared to death. Captain Carney, chief of the Louisville Police Department, quit his job pretty much to become an investigator so that he could go and find...
To focus on
finding and arresting.
Wow, so he was serious
Joseph,
about that.
Wendling. Private citizens and organizations started donating money. And before long, there was a $6,000 reward out.
Wow.
For Wendling's arrest.
Now that's something.
That was a lot of money back then. Carney had reward posters circulated all over Europe, as well as Germany, posted all over France, and in every little town in the United States. He was age 27, 5 feet, 10 or 11 inches, weight about 140 pounds, blue eyes, rather squinting, full protruding nose, heavy black eyebrows, black hair, black mustache, inclined to curl, narrow stoop shoulders, swarthy complexion, rosy cheeks, is a Frenchman, but sometimes taken for Hungarian or Italian. On July 31st in 1910, a telegraph was wired from San Francisco that read, "I have caught Joseph Wendling. He was using the name Henry Jacquemin, admits his identity, and recognized me. Had quite a long conversation with him, and he waives papers. Will soon start home as soon as I can rest up."
Okay. But he was going under another name.
Yes. Wendling had been living under the alias of Henry Jacquemin. He was engaged to an attractive widow who...
Wait, is he divorced yet?
No.
Okay.
He had told this girl that he was going to be inheriting some money from his wealthy uncle. Captain Carney sent a letter to a different girl that he knew Wendling had been fooling with and found out that he'd passed through Los Angeles. Then in San Antonio, he found out he was at Rio Vista and had sent some postcards to some different girls in Texas using his fake name. In the meantime, Carney knew the girl he was engaged to had gone back to Missouri. So he decided to try to go back and track him down again that way. Carney said it was a hard trip with washouts, mudslides, and 59 hours through Kansas on a freight train.
Ugh.
When he got there, the widow, that Wendling's supposed fiance, told Carney that she hadn't heard from him and had burned all of his letters. But when she stepped out of the room, he took a look for himself.
Oh, wow.
And found a postcard from Henry Jacquemin that was dated April 5th, 1910.
So she's lying too for him.
And the postmark was Vallejo, California. And it read, "From your old friend, H.J., with love, one nice big kiss to Helena." And then it had the address. So Captain Thomas Burke of the San Francisco Police Department was called, and he was able to trace Wendling from Vallejo to San Francisco, where he found him in the bathroom of a rooming house.
In the bathroom?
Yep. The conversation...
Was he hiding in this bathroom, or was he just...
Maybe. So apparently what had happened was at first the landlady wouldn't let him in. They ended up kind of busted on in and found him in there. He was actually working, they said, underneath the sink. So he may not have been hiding.
Okay.
This is how the conversation went. "What's your name?" "Henry Joseph Jacquemin." "Did you ever go under the name Joseph Wendling?" "Yes." "Did you work at St. John's Church in Louisville, Kentucky?" "Yes. But me no kill little girl. Me innocent. When we go back, me tell you." At this, Joseph Wendling was arrested calmly and seemed really unbothered by his arrest. His main worry was about facing his wife.
And he also seemed unbothered when they were searching for her. So maybe he's just got this ability to remain calm under...
Yes.
Because he's under arrest, you would think that would make you...
That would make you nervous. So he said he ran away January 14th because he had trouble with his wife. He claimed that she took every dime of money he made and wouldn't give him any for a cigar or a glass of wine.
Well, that's probably true.
Or a glass of wine. He said he knew they were looking for him. He said he kind of thought, wow, $6,000 for him seemed ridiculous for poor Joe when he's innocent. He said he didn't turn himself in because he didn't do anything and wasn't going to confess when there was nothing to confess to. Carney said Wendling was the coolest customer that he had ever seen in his life. He said that the prisoner never showed the slightest bit of sadness, that he laughed and joked the whole way from San Francisco back home. He said that he even joked about having a girl in every town.
Which was true, it sounds like.
Yeah. While Mr. Wendling was bragging about all these other women, Mrs. Wendling decided to stand by her man, and Mr. Wendling seemed genuinely grateful to her for that. Because she hired him a good attorney from Louisville that would represent him. Dr. Albert Ross Hill from Missouri State University was a psychologist, and he actually interviewed Wendling on August 8th in 1910, and this is what he wrote about the interview with him. He said, "This is one of the most startling cases of abnormal development I have ever known."
Wow.
This chap is a bundle of nerves. We would think that means he's fallen apart, but he's saying the opposite of that.
Oh.
This chap is a bundle of nerves, but I believe that when he does weaken, he will tell a story which will even startle those familiar with the case. He is abnormal beyond a doubt. He could not answer any direct question and inevitably resorted to, I do not know what this means or how to say it, subterfuge. Subterfuge.
Okay, that's like when you're covering something up and you're deceiving somebody.
Okay, so that's what he resorted to.
And you're throwing clues to put somebody off the case.
Okay. It was impossible to hold his eyes while he closely observed everyone about him, and his eyes are constantly dancing. So that was the quote. On the morning of November 28th in 1910, Joseph Wendling's trial began in the court of Jefferson County before the Honorable James P. Gregory. Just 10 short days of a year from her disappearance.
Okay.
There was hardly room to wiggle in that courtroom.
I'm sure, because people want to see justice for her.
She was kind of like the JonBenet Ramsey of that day. You know, people were sitting on back steps. They were even climbing through windows, anything to get a peek. Even the then famous comedian, which I don't know who this is, but his name was Eddie Foy. And apparently he came, and at first he wasn't going to be admitted until they realized who he was. And he was like, I'm doing a show here tonight. And they were like, oh, yeah, there's room for you.
Oh, wow.
So he was able to come in and watch the trial. Wendling seemed like he genuinely did not comprehend the severity of his situation. Alma's aunt testified that the shoes she helped Alma pick out that morning were the same found at the scene of the crime. The druggist also testified who had seen Alma that morning on her way to Mass. And then, okay, so one of the reasons Wendling had drawn so much attention to himself was because he had up and left town, right? On January 14th, which was the same day.
Yeah, which looks very suspicious.
Right.
Same day that uncle came.
Exactly. The uncle testified that he thought, he couldn't be 100% sure, he knows somebody was there, and he thought that it was Wendling, who he noticed stand in an earshot of the conversation that he had had with the priest while he was performing some of the duties. But Father Schumann testified that he actually didn't think Wendling had been in the building or had any knowledge of the conversation that he had with Mr. Fair that day. Father Schumann also got on the stand to give a description of Wendling's duties. He cleaned the church, he lit candles for the services, he lit the furnace, locked the doors, you know, just all these little rang bells, that kind of thing. He testified that after the police called asking about Alma Kellner, he walked over and spoke to Wendling, and that's when he had noticed that strange smell. But right after is when the police showed up, and Joseph Wendling held candles for Father Schumann and investigators for them to search the church. He even took them down into the cellar. Now, another lady came forward named Rosa Staubel, and she testified that she had actually been at the church on the morning of December 9th, and that she did recall seeing Alma praying. She said that she had been there with her friend, Anne Grail, but Anne had finished up and went home, so that she and Alma were the only two left praying in the church that morning. When she saw Joseph Wendling, the janitor, come into the sanctuary to light candles, she said that she couldn't help but notice that, like, he would come in and kind of stare and then look away. And then he finally walked out. And she said she was suspicious of him, especially when he came back into the room. But she left at 10:45. Why would she leave if she was so suspicious?
Why would you not stay there and wait for her?
Right. And honestly, so if that's his job, it really wouldn't be that weird for him to come in and out of the sanctuary.
Yeah, but if she's sitting there saying that she was suspicious of him, then why did you leave that little girl by herself?
Exactly.
If it was, like, it wasn't uncommon, but
right.
But then why say
you're thinking suspicious? That, because obviously you weren't that suspicious,
right?
Or you wouldn't have left her.
That's what I'm thinking.
I think after the fact, she was, then she's thinking. And I do believe that happened because also Anne Grail testified, the lady that she said she had been with, and she backed up Rosa's stories. She had actually met Rosa on the way to Mass that morning, so they went together and sat together. She also saw Alma at the altar that morning. She also saw Joseph Wendling before she left, but she recalled seeing another man at the back of the church just as she was about to leave. He was wearing a black overcoat. He just was kind of looking in at them like a couple of minutes and then walked back out. Both women and another woman came forward that said that Alma had been really fidgety and that she looked like she was waiting for somebody. Like she would look back behind her, like she was 8 years old, trying to pray. She kept looking back over her shoulder, like maybe she was waiting for somebody. So who knows?
So again, it drew their attention to it, that they recognized they were observing that. Why would they have left her there by herself?
Right. The deputy testified that in a trunk in Wendling's apartment, they found a big knife that had clotted blood and tissue all over it, as well as 3 razors. And blood and tissue would be found on one of those razors as well. A pathologist tested was definitely blood on the knives and on the articles of clothing. Remember, I told you earlier some clothing was found. There was also urine found on the clothing. Yeah, I know. The coroner described the condition of Alma's body in horrifying detail, noting that one of her hands had never been found. They were not able to give a definitive cause of death. I think I said that earlier because of the condition of her corpse, but said if he had to guess, blunt force trauma was the cause. He also couldn't tell with absolute certainty if she'd been sexually assaulted, but he definitely believed so.
Right.
For dramatic effect during the trial, they also brought out Alma's foot.
Into the trial?
Yes.
Oh.
With the shoe on it to show to the jury.
Okay. I get that you need them to see this evidence, but her poor parents have to sit through that would be just unbelievable.
Unbelievable, yes. The jury was taken over to the church so that they could see the layout of the church and to, view the crime scene for themselves so that they could have a visual understanding of the prosecution's theory on how they believed the crime took place. When Joseph Wendling was put on the stand, he talked about why he left town to get away from his controlling wife. And he wanted the jury to know that when he shaved his mustache, it wasn't because he was trying to disguise himself. It was as simple as his new girlfriend didn't like it, so he shaved. He denied having anything whatsoever to do with Alma's murder. He said that he hadn't even known about the girl's disappearance until Father Schumann came over and Officer Quill came to search the church for her, and he fully cooperated and helped in the search. So he's saying he didn't have a lot of time to think it through. Like this happened like back to back. Wendling explained that the knife found in his room had been used to perform kind of like a foot surgery on a horse, that he was digging this huge nail, not him, but actually his brother-in-law was digging this huge nail out of this horse's foot. And I guess it had been like way, way, way embedded in there. And his brother-in-law actually testified that that was true. He had been the one to borrow the knife and remove the nail.
Why didn't he clean it up?
I know, but why wouldn't you anyway? Surely the first thing you would do, I don't care what kind of an idiot you are, you're going to clean up the blood if you stab someone.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That was a weird thing. It was testified to by the brother-in-law that it had been a bloody ordeal.
Okay.
He explained away the blood on his clothes by telling the court that he had accidentally shot himself. And that was true too.
Really?
Yes.
This story is just like a lot of weird little things.
He said that he had bled all over several pieces of his clothing. And back then it wasn't like today where we'd get rid of them and just get new clothes. In the early 1900s, you might have to wear what you have to wear. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So that's what he was saying. He still had the clothes. He said as far as the ring and pin found in his possession belonging to Alma, that could be true. He was kind of in charge of lost and found. He said that there was all kinds of stuff in that trunk that he had found besides those two things. And that does make sense.
I was going to say that stumps me a little bit because this whole time I've had that in the back of my mind. Well, he's had her pen.
Right.
But that kind of is a plausible explanation. And did they find other things?
Yes. It wasn't just those two things. There was lots of things. And the mother really was shaky on if they were for sure her daughters or not. The ring, she said she couldn't say for sure.
Pen was,
the pen,
right?
She said she was almost sure. Like it looked just like hers, is what she said. So I don't know how common that was. That's even difficult for me to say.
Yeah.
When Detective Carney got on the stand, he admitted that just after Alma had disappeared, he had gone to the cellar to search, but because it was so dark, he didn't search as thorough as he should have. He gave a rundown of the events that led to Wendling's arrest. That was that. After persuasive closing arguments, it took the jury 3.5 hours to come to the unanimous decision that Joseph Wendling was guilty of Alma's murder. But at first, they couldn't decide because there were 7 that did not want him to get the death penalty. All this stuff is very circumstantial.
Right. There is a lot of it, but you've almost explained a lot of it away in a believable way.
Right.
So that would be a hard one.
So they didn't want him to die. But then when they were like, okay, if we take the death penalty off of the table, then they were like, okay. So then they came up with a unanimous decision of guilty.
Okay.
He was sentenced to life in prison. Wendling told Lena, if I'm guilty, I should die. If I'm innocent, they should let me go home.
He is a strange bird.
He is. He appealed the decision, but it was denied. So Wendling went to prison, and he actually studied and became an electrician while he was there. He was a model prisoner, a favorite among the staff. They were all pretty lax with him. He was actually the electrician of the prison. So he kind of did as he pleased, really. He even helped recapture a fellow escaped prisoner one time.
This story is bizarre.
Yes. Because of his skill as an electrician, Wendling moved pretty freely, around the prison, like I said. One morning in 1919, he got up, changed into some work clothes, and told a guard on the outside that he had to repair a line just outside the prison walls. The guard helped him out and over the wall, and Wendling walked away.
Wow.
The Board of Prison Commissioners put out a $200 reward for his recapture, dead or alive.
Yeah.
A fatal accident happened during the search for him when a gun exploded in the hands of a man named Robert Hurld, and he was instantly killed. Just a few days later, Wendling was found on the streets of Frankfurt. He was armed with a knife and 2 guns. He resisted arrest and had to be clubbed into submission. He said he'd been on his way back to Louisville when he was recognized. He said that he left because they had gotten a new warden and that this warden was going to make him work in the shoe shop. He did not want to work in the shoe shop. He said, I am a skilled electrician. This is what I love to do. And I'm not, going to work on shoes. And so he decided to escape. And that may or may not have been true because he could have escaped long before then.
Yeah. This is weird to me. All of this is just weird.
Yeah. But back in prison, all the faith the guards and warden had in him was gone.
Right.
Understandably so.
Right.
So gone were the days of him roaming around the prison at his leisure. He went from being treated like a friend of the warden to the worst of the worst prisoners, especially because this was a new warden.
Right.
They made him walk around with a ball and chain. After that, it seemed like he just settled his butt back down. Okay. And he actually did get to continue being an electrician after some time. I don't know, maybe he just had a wild hair, decided he'd try and see what he could get away with. I didn't end up telling this. He had been dressing up like a woman to disguise himself while he
was on the run.
Yes.
I mean, pretty smart, I guess.
Yeah.
If you don't want to get found out.
And he was good looking. I was so surprised.
Well, that's why he's had a woman in every town. Because he was able to.
He was a Frenchman. Yeah. And he was very good looking.
Good looking and probably had that accent.
They said he had a thick accent.
Yeah.
But in 1928, Wendling read something that he believed could possibly change his circumstances. So he wrote a letter to the True Detective magazine, and this is what it says. Dear Sir, I'm writing you this letter to find out if you will do me a favor. I'm an inmate at the Kentucky State Penitentiary at this town. Am serving a life sentence for a conviction that was handed down by the jury of Jefferson County, Kentucky, for the murder of the little girl that is in the center topic of your story titled The Crime That Rocked a Continent. And I wish to add to this that I am an innocent man, have no connection whatsoever with this mystery, as it is absolutely the work of someone else, not me. I am eligible for parole and have the consideration of the parole committee, which sits at this institution every 3 months. And I am asking you that if the story published in your magazine is true as to the characters and the incidences related in this story mentioned above, will you be so kind as to make an affidavit to this effect, stating in it that the confession mentioned in the story is true? Kind sir, you have no idea what or how much this will mean to me if same will be gotten. I have served 18 years for this crime. I am as innocent of it as you are, and I barely believe that if you could do this, if it is a true confession, it will be the gate to my release. Yours respectfully, Joseph Wendling.
Huh. Well, who was that?
Okay. I gotta just kind of keep that.
Okay.
That was written in 1928. Okay. And then in 1934, years later, Wendling wrote another letter, this time to Frank Fair, Alma's uncle. And the contents of that letter have never been disclosed to the public. But in return, Fair wrote to Governor Ruby Laffoon recommending the prisoner be paroled on the condition that he immediately leaves the country and goes back to France. Governor Laffoon honored the request, and on January 30th, 1935, Wendling boarded a train with the warden Thomas Logan and headed to New York, where he was met by his wife Lena, now 75. While in New York, he was allowed to sightsee, went to a wedding with some friends before he boarded a ship to France. Lena didn't travel with him. She decided to stay in the United States with friends. Wendling said he bore no grudges against those who had wrongfully put him in jail. He said that he always knew someday he'd regain his freedom. He was excited to get back home to see his parents, and he lived in a place called Ginless, where they had this little farm, and he had missed his family desperately. But when he got there, he wasn't able to find his parents. He was taken to the local priest to see if, they'd moved away. And the priest explained that after his conviction, his parents were told that he had been executed. And they had been so devastated that they died just a few months later.
Oh, gosh.
Wendling left the little town and went to Paris and told the press that he was seriously considering suing the United States government for his wrongful conviction. He said he was informed that Alma's true murderer had confessed his fiendish deeds to a priest just before he died. But after this, it came to light that right after he was convicted, so when he was convicted 25 years ago, Wendling wrote a letter to Frank Fair, Alma's cousin, given a partial confession that he did not do it himself, but he did help dispose of her body to cover up the crime of a priest.
Oh my goodness, that's Schmidt.
Mr. Fair let him know that he had no doubt that he was 100% guilty himself. And if and when he would make a full confession, then and only then would he agree to not only step back and not to stand in the way of his parole, but when it came up, he would help him. But Wendling stuck to his story. Even after coming up for parole and being denied time after time for years and years and years. But after this threat of Wendling's to sue the U.S. government, an article came out that read, "Now that Joseph Wendling is in France, it can be told he did sign a full confession of the murder of Alma Kellner before being given the parole that liberated him after 24 years. Wendling's eligibility of parole depended on the attitude of the family of the slain child. As long as they blocked it, no government would grant it. So when parole was finally approved, it was because Wendling had met two conditions given by Frank Fair: that he would immediately be deported, and the other wasn't disclosed at the time. Quote, "But now we know it was the full confession that retracted his accusations against the priest and shouldered the full blame." So he had to say, I was lying about the priest, that he did it.
In order to get his parole.
In order to get his parole. So here's the thing. Hans Schmidt was working between St. Joseph's and St. Boniface Church during the time of the murder. He was questioned about the murder. He denied it. Then he admitted it. And then he denied it.
Hans Schmidt?
Yes.
Admitted it and then denied it? Oh.
Yes. Some people say that he definitely isn't guilty because he would have confessed like he did to Anna Mueller's murder. But he also retracted and went back and forth with his guilt in her case as well. So here are some different possibilities. Was it Hans Schmidt? Was it Wendling? Was it the priest that was there?
Goodness. Okay.
Was it there's so many possibilities.
A lot. I don't think it was the priest that was there.
Okay.
I'll tell you why I don't think it was him.
Okay.
Wasn't there a visiting priest?
There was.
I don't feel like he would have had the opportunity.
Okay. Yeah.
I think
that makes sense.
That other priest was there. They went, I think that said that he made him lunch or something. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Yeah. I just always wondered if that was Hans Schmidt.
Oh, if he was the visiting priest.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. I didn't consider that.
Yeah.
What else?
Or was it Wendling? I mean, there were a lot of suspicious things about him too.
The whole time I was thinking it was him. Like, there's no way it's not him. Yes, it's circumstantial, but there are all these things pointing to him. But then you got about 3/4 through and you started telling all this other stuff. And now I'm like, I'm just not sure. I'm like, well, I'm thinking it had to be Hans Schmidt. But
right.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
When I go back and listen to this episode, after we put it out, I'll have all kinds of comments that I'll be like, oh, I should have said this, or, oh, now I think that. But right now, just hearing it for the first time, my mind is just like, I do not know.
Isn't it crazy?
That's crazy.
I do think it's interesting that he, the whole time, said it was this other priest.
And, what are the chances? All right, Hans Schmidt was there. He killed somebody in an equally brutally fashion.
And almost the same way.
And
she was cut up as well, wrapped.
So what are the chances that this other guy really did it and he just happened to be there?
Right.
And he said he helped him get rid of the body.
Yes.
I don't know. I think maybe it was Hans Schmidt.
Yeah.
Do you?
It's a really good possibility. I don't know.
But why would he? I mean, and then he ended up going to prison for 25 years for something he didn't do. But was he maintaining that whole time? Until
the very end. Until he finally, for years and years and years, he could have been paroled much earlier.
Yeah. If
the uncle told him, he was like, you give a full confession. And
see, the uncle really believed he did it. But see, the uncle didn't know about Hans Schmidt like we know about Hans Schmidt. Right. Am I right? Okay.
I don't think so. And I think if he did, it was just briefly heard about him.
Yeah.
But the family believed 100% that it was Wendling. They never entertained anything other than that.
That's crazy. I want you to hurry up and put this one out so I can listen again. I've got to hear this one twice because I've got a lot of things going around in my brain.
But I'm like, if he really did do that, cases like that, like with sexual predators, and I believe that was the case of a sexual predator, I think they're going to reoffend. If it was Wendling,
this guy,
I feel like he would have maybe before or after that reoffended. I know he was in prison,
but I'm still okay. I hear what you're saying. But I'm still wondering about the accusation that his wife made about that, the school, and then it turned out...
They searched that out.
And it absolutely
did
wasn't
not happen.
True.
Nope, did not happen.
So I'm wondering why she said that.
Well, they were mad at each other.
Oh, well.
I think she might have been scared too.
Okay.
They had arrested her and they were interrogating her. They were not kind to her. I know that when he first got back in town, he was mad at her. But I think if she really believed he did it, I mean, she really stood by his side the whole time. At first, she was like, yeah, he did while he was away, she was like, yeah, he was been fooling with other girls. But then she was like, but he was kind to me.
Yeah.
And then when he got back, they were very tender toward each other. I think he was just a player.
He was a player, that's for sure.
He was definitely a player.
And he was young. And he was obviously a really likable guy, not just with the ladies, but with everybody. But I don't know. I can't figure this one out.
I'm going to show you his picture. This was him when he went to prison. I think he was so cute. Well, I mean, unless he's a murderer.
Then he's not cute.
Then he's ugly.
Oh, he is cute. Yeah, he's got a baby face.
Yeah.
He doesn't look like a murderer, but we all know that means nothing.
Right. But this is him when he got out of prison. This makes me sad.
I mean, there's a lot of good-looking murderers. Oh. Yeah, he was an old... Okay, he's not that good-looking there. He's an old man.
He went in his 20s and came out in his 50s.
Yeah. I got to process that one a little bit. Well, those sure were some hard times.
Yes, they were.
Now, those were some hard times, and I was given a very stern warning by my wife not to say anything funny about the story or the poem. And I told her if she didn't like the way I did it, she could do it herself. But she wasn't in the room when I said that. So here I am to very somberly remind you to check out Hard Times and True Crimes and tell everybody you know, and a few people you don't, to check us out. Till next time, goodbye.